Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Money and Stuff. I'm your host, Sam Rodriguez. With me as always is Conor Shepard, here to talk to you about money and stuff. We got a good one
Yeah.
today, timely.
Ooh, we
Hopefully,
do.
hopefully we get to put it out before,
Before something happens,
before something actually happens. How often does that happen to us?
yeah.
Like every time we have something timely, right as we put it out, it sort of gets resolved, right? So maybe putting this out will
Yeah.
actually resolve whatever what we're about to talk about. Right. With me as always, Conor Shepard. Conor, man, how are you doing?
Doing well, Sam. I was in DC this weekend for my good friend's engagement party. It was a lot of fun. Got to see a bunch of old friends. So had a good weekend. Tired, but good time.
Good, man. Did you get the chance to talk to anybody about the debt ceiling issue that we're about to discuss today? Did you get to give your
I
input?
quite
Talk to
literally
anybody?
did.
Let's hear it.
That same friend who got engaged actually in the middle of a pregame before going out, he just leans over and he's like, Connor, the debt ceiling's a real crisis right now. I was like, oh
Oh
yeah,
yeah,
let's talk.
I
Weird
meant
time to bring it up, but
yeah, I meant anybody with influence over the decision making process with the debt ceiling.
did not. I did not run into any politicians. I was keeping an eye out, but didn't find one.
Didn't happen. Okay. All right. Well, let's jump to it today. I think a good place to start will be talking about what the debt ceiling is and giving some history on the debt ceiling. So, debt ceiling is really almost exactly what it sounds like, right? The government sets a limit on the amount of debt that they're going to take on before they vote as to whether or not to take on any more debt. I'm going to tell you right now, the debt ceiling is a big deal, but I want to talk a little bit about why it really shouldn't be. Um, you have any idea? Did you look up like when the whole debt ceiling idea came about?
Yeah, yeah. I what is it? It looked like it was right around the end of World War I. That basically they started raising it as a way for them to have more flexibility and maneuverability with borrowing money
Yeah,
and issuing debt securities. And so it initially was meant to be a way to give them more leverage, more maneuverability
yeah,
as the government.
really, yeah. It was really just how do we save time, right? Because prior
Yep.
to the debt ceiling, Congress would have to vote every time about issuing new government bonds. That's essentially what
Mm-hmm.
this debt is. It's government bonds. That's how our government operates and finances things. That's how the government borrows money is by issuing bonds. And so what was happening prior to 1917 was a lot of Congress's time was being spent just constantly having to vote on increasing or increasing the amount of bonds that were out there. And during World War
Yep.
One, they were having to do this even more. So they said basically like, hey, how about we set a ceiling so that way we only have to vote on this every once in a while. And I think ceiling was probably the wrong choice of words. It was just bad
Mm-hmm.
marketing, right? Because ceiling
Mm-hmm.
implies a cap that you're not supposed to go beyond. When really all they were trying to do was set a number that would put them far out enough that they would say, we probably don't have to vote on this for another year,
Yeah.
right? So ceiling probably was never a good word. It was more, how high do we need to raise it to delay this so that way we can actually focus on other things that we need to be voting on.
Yeah. Yeah. It definitely was not planned uh, long term. Like they were not thinking very long term with the idea of it being setting it as a number for the debt ceiling to reach. Whereas if I mean, I'm not a politician. Maybe an easier solution would have been to just make it something you vote on quarterly or like every year, or not every year, sorry, every 4 years or every 5 years, like setting a time threshold as opposed to. But I'm not a politician.
I think that's a good idea. Yeah, that would have taken away the sort of feeling of, oh, we can't cross this number, right? Would have, hey, where are we at? Okay, we'll vote again, and
Yeah.
in another 3 months. Do we think we'll have enough to get through the next 3 months? If so, let's delay it. If not, what do we need to do to get to the next 3 months? Right? Yeah, that
Yeah.
probably would have been better instead of being able to use the debt ceiling as leverage and a grandstanding tool. And
Yeah.
I'm not trying to say something about either of the political parties. Both have been known to use the debt ceiling when it is to their advantage to do so. But the reality is, it's not supposed to be this big of a deal. And I know people say, "Oh, well, we can't let spending get out of control." You know, when the pandemic hit, yes, we did spend a lot of money. Um, we can. I don't want to get into how much money was being spent before then, but it comes down to, can we service that debt? Right? The government, the U.S. government has operated on debt for a lot longer than people realize. But the important thing is the amount of money we bring in from taxes, right? Is the revenue that we bring in, is it enough to meet our monthly payments? So imagine, your mortgage payment, your car payment, your electric bill, whatever else you have, you've got to make sure that your income is enough to pay those things, right? And a few of those things are paid with debt. Your mortgage, your car payment, those are the two main things, right? And as a government, there's some things that we pay with debt. And we do that by issuing bonds, right? So to give you an idea, like, of where we sit right now, you know, um, over the last 8 years, we've increased our revenue from $4 trillion to $4.9 trillion. So we've increased it quite a bit. And so when they talk about, giving a higher budget to the IRS, it's more about being more efficient with how we collect taxes. Because I want to say that they estimate that we're missing about $1 trillion a year in taxes that people are just kind of getting away with because we don't have the staff to really audit people the way that they should be. And it's
Yeah.
not, your everyday W-2 income earner. It is your like it takes a lot to get to a trillion, right? So it's your people who have extremely high incomes or extremely high net worths that are probably getting around most of it. But as
Yeah.
of right now, what it takes to service that debt, right, make those debt payments, um, I'll give a little bit of history. So, in the late '90s, it was at $400 billion just to service that debt, right? Not thinking about what it takes to fund Social Security and all our other government programs, but just to service the debt, $400 billion. By 2015, that had dropped to $300 billion. By the time we got to 2020, right, we had gotten that to over $400 billion. So in 4 years, jumped up by like 25%. But we are on
Mhm.
the way down right now, right? That debt service is down to $350 billion. So all of this talk about cutting spending, it's sort of already naturally happening, right? You've got to remember that over the last few years, we've spent a lot of money trying to make sure that we did not go into financial catastrophe during the pandemic, right?
Mhm.
And that spending has been cut. And a lot of the debt that was issued at extremely low interest rates. So to service that debt is not very difficult at all. So
Mhm.
similar to anyone who bought a car or bought a home, in 2020, 2021, you have a ridiculously low interest rate that you're paying on your mortgage. It's the same thing with the debt that was accumulated during that period of time. To service
Mhm.
it is almost nothing, right? So as a total of all of the outlay, right, you look at the debt that we've accumulated from 1980 to 2000, to service that debt, it was about 12 to 16% of the total outlay of spending, right?
Mhm.
That's how much it made up of it. But it did get lower from 2000 to 2015, dropped to about 9 or 10%, and then jumped to over 16% by the time we got to 2020, right? So even already before the pandemic hit, we were at like 16%. So it had jumped up, but it's already dropping again, right?
Yeah.
It's dropping. I want to say we're at like closer to like 10%, 9%, something like that. So this is a lot of, I don't want to say that the debt ceiling isn't a big deal, but we're in a spot where, I'm not saying that the US should take on more debt for things that, I don't want them to take on debt just to take on debt, but I do want them to take on debt to meet their obligations, right? We're in a spot where we're not increasing the amount that we'll be spending to service that debt. It's
Mhm.
actually already on the way down. So, um, this is I don't
Even
really know what to call it.
even yeah, and maybe that would be a good point to talk about. Even with that being the case, even with the misrepresentation that calling it a debt ceiling, brings forward. Um, can you kind of explain would what would we expect to happen if no agreement is reached, and if we just seem to
So why
hit the limit?
so why is it actually a big deal? Is what you're asking.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, imagine what would happen at home if you suddenly stopped paying your bills, right? Your credit worthiness would go down, right?
Mhm.
When your credit score goes down, everything becomes more expensive. Your insurance becomes more expensive. Any additional debt you want to get becomes more expensive. It becomes very difficult, right? And so it would cause a lot of economic disruption. So, number one is we would probably be downgraded, right? Like right now, the United States is seen as the most credit worthy country in the world. That's why everybody likes to hold US debt. But what happens is if we don't pay our bills, is our credit rating drops. Like countries actually have credit ratings, and our credit rating can drop. And if our credit rating drops, suddenly we're not as attractive of a borrower, right? And when that happens, suddenly it becomes more expensive to borrow.
Yeah.
So even though rates are higher, they're still fairly low compared to historical standards. But if our credit rating drops, and then we have to start issuing debt again, um, it will cost a lot more to service that debt down the road. So, for
Yeah.
example, in 2011, we had a similar standoff, right? And I'll tell you a few things happened. One, U.S. credit rating was downgraded, right? And two, the markets obviously didn't like it. It creates a lot of uncertainty. And the market did drop by about 20% over that summer when they were trying to get this figured out. Now, I will say, as soon as they came to an agreement, the market rebounded very quickly, and we ended the year basically flat. So once they come to an agreement, even if we see some market volatility, I think the economy's still in a pretty good place. We just got to, come to an agreement so everybody feels comfortable and markets go back up. But what's interesting is what that 3 to 4 month standoff actually cost us. So it's estimated that over 10 years, that standoff actually ended up costing the US $18.9 billion. Right? That drop in credit worthiness, all the ramifications of it ended up costing us almost $19 billion. Right? So to come up with some sort of agreement before we can't meet our debt obligations or before we can't pay our bills is very, very important in keeping our budget low, right? Um, the other thing from a standpoint of um, what happens if this drags on and on and on, it's, one is uncertainty. People will not feel good about it. It will make people very uneasy. The markets will fall. But there's also a reason the markets will fall. Government spending accounts for about 25% of our GDP. That means everything that the government spends money doing, right? Paying employees, government contracts, whatever it is, it's about 25% of our economy. And if suddenly the government has to just stop spending money, that's a lot of money that leaves our economy. And if all of that money leaves our economy really starts to go down very, very quickly. So that uncertainty that people feel is not unfounded. It really can have some dire consequences down the road.
Definitely. I mean, it's very unfortunate that so often in more recent history with these standoffs about the debt ceiling, it's so much saber rattling and brinksmanship, but there are ripple effects from just simply dragging it out. And
Yeah,
hopefully,
the ripple
they're able
effects
to reach
hurt
a
people like you and I and our clients and everybody else who may be listening, right? That's who it really hurts.
yeah.
Um, this is, it's something that we cannot not deal with. It has to be addressed. We can't, we can't not do something about it, right? And it's unfortunate that we always wait till the last minute because it creates a lot of fear and anxiety in a lot of people.
Yeah.
Um, so, I mean, the other thing that I think both sides need to realize is that, if we don't come to some sort of agreement and debt service is more expensive because, we get some sort of down rating credit worthiness from, as far as credit worthiness is concerned, you got two sides of this equation: what you're spending and what you're bringing in. And if it costs more, even if we end up with some cuts in the government budget, they may be offset by an increased amount of debt servicing spending, right? If we get downgraded in credit. And if that happens, then as citizens, we may have an extra bill because the government may have to actually raise taxes in order to continue to meet the new higher interest debt obligations that they've had to incur because they don't have as high of a credit rating. So it's very, very important that they get this figured out. But there's really nothing to figure out. The answer is just raise it.
Yeah.
Right? Yes. Do we want the government to cut spending? Yes. But spending actually has already been dropping, right? Or at least what it costs for what we spend, it's been dropping. So it's not any more complicated than that.
Yeah.
It's a revenue and expenses thing. And I know there's a few things on the table that people talk about cutting, right? They keep talking about cutting Medicare or cutting Social Security. And I don't think you can do either of those two, because I think both of those will be economically devastating. Because cutting either of those two takes money out of senior citizens' pockets. You take money out of senior citizens' pockets, you take money out of the economy. Again, economically devastating to do so, right? And I think we need to work hard to keep our credit worthiness, so that way, whatever debt we do issue, we keep it at a low interest rate. So that way it doesn't cost us very much to service that debt.
Definitely. Let's hope they can figure something out. It's
not that hard, right? It shouldn't be made as big of a deal as it is. It should not be used as a political weapon by anybody. This is how our government is able to stay afloat and do everything that we need it to do. And we just need them to raise it. That's all there is to it. It just has to be raised.
Simple as that.
Yeah, that's it. All right. That's all I got.
All right.
I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I should say about it. I'm looking at my notes really quickly, but I don't know. There's not a lot to it. I mean, it's, this thing has already been raised. I mean, it kind of came into effect around 1917, and it's been raised about 100 times already.
Yeah.
Right. It's the way it was designed to operate. That was the design. And we need to just keep following the design right
now. We'll just have to wait and see.
That's right. We'll wait and see. All right. Who knows what we're going to talk about next time? I think we talked about taxes before, right? And we thought this debt ceiling thing would be a good thing to talk about. We got to come up with something. We'll have something new and exciting for you guys next time.
Very exciting.
Right? Whatever it is, it's going to be exciting. All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in. I don't know what we're talking about next time, but look forward to it. Look very much. You should be looking forward to it. Thanks a lot.